Okay.
Continue.
Okay.
Hello. My question is, let me get it up. So I was just wondering how or will the situation in Xinjiang cause any uncertainties or disrupt the initiative or future projects based on all the tensions, etc.?
Are you saying the situation in Xinjiang?
Yes.
Is that what your question was?
Yes.
Well, that depends on which side you see it from. Those who want an independent East Turkestan will probably not be happy about the situation, whereas China now has announced several times that the last 3 years plus, there has been no terrorist attacks and no people killed in Xinjiang. So in that sense, it's more calm than before. Is that an answer to your question, or did you want something specifically about it?
No, yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. There's much more to say about this, of course, but you said about stability and tension, right?
Yes, I mean, in general, like what the whole situation, has that caused any conflict or especially for the people in Xinjiang? But yeah, I mean, if there's
I would just say that, as I think it's clear from my video also, I have not myself been to Xinjiang. I cannot tell you what the situation is like right now there. I can listen to people who've been there, independent people who've gone there, people who live in China who's gone there. And the picture of that is quite different from what you get in the Western media. It has created conflicts because Xinjiang is to create a Cold War atmosphere with the accusation that what is happening or has happened in Xinjiang is a genocide. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you for the answer. And then I would like to ask Surya Verma to ask his next question.
Okay, can you hear me?
I hear you, yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. The idea about the multipolar world and the darker side going away, and that's what it's very exciting. And then the point is that how will China make, or the friends of China make it happen, or more light into the chances of the duration and the chances how this will happen in the coming future? How much more likely it is? Hello?
Hello.
Could we have more light on the chances and duration it could take to reach there, a more peaceful multipolar world?
Hello.
Excuse me, what will happen in it? What are you thinking of? Hello? A more peaceful, well, are you talking about Xinjiang too, or you're talking about China in general?
China in general, actually. China versus the world.
Well, in my view, China is building various projects that will be helpful to create cooperation, stability, and some kind of peace, whatever we define that as, predominantly by the Belt and Road Initiative, which is tying countries to cooperate with each other. Of course, this is not without problems. This is not without feelings of not having a 50-50 benefit from it. but it's still a vision that is, in my view, as a peace researcher, much better than exploitation or usual trade as the West has done the last 300 years in the third world, so-called developing countries. Because when you make people cooperate with each other and benefit, they will be less likely to start killing each other. It can create conflicts, but it does not necessarily create violence. And I look for projects around the world or visions around the world where we can have a hope that it will be leading to less violence. I'm not saying without conflicts, but I'm then saying negotiations and discussions rather than beginning to kill each other.
Okay, yes, that.
And if you look at it from a peace and human rights point of view, I think it's remarkable that China has uplifted 700 million people out of poverty. Nobody has done that before, and that to me is peace too. Instead of creating tension from people who are lying in the gutter and dying there and not having their human rights to existence satisfied or met, then you have a country that the last 30 years have done something for the poorest. It's still a class society in the sense that there are big income gaps, but it's certainly a much better society than many others in terms of, you know, people are not sitting begging in the streets. I find that both one first step to peace and to dialogue and to uplifting more people, the poorest to be less poor and the rich to be less rich, so that you can end up with what I guess is a dream in China, some kind of socialism, which does not, in my view, is not defined by exactly everybody having exactly equally much, but more that there are fewer poor people than there are rich people. A kind of solidarity, a family feeling, if you will, which we have lost in the Western world.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And well, thank you for the answer. And I would just quickly like to remind, for those who are watching on Facebook or here for Zoom, feel free to post your questions in chat, either Facebook or here, and we are seeing them both, and I will ask you to, or ask myself if you're on Facebook, or ask you to ask a question here on Zoom. It also does not need to be a question. You can also share some thoughts or ask for some more information. It's an open format conversation. Yeah.
As long as everybody is kind.
Exactly. And I would like to invite DNS to ask their question next, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes, so while listening to the last parts of your speech, I was wondering if you would speculate, or like imagine, what would cataclysmic events that would bring the West to change their stance towards China, or to like compel it to cooperate with China?
Well, I think the West as such, in principle, would be perfectly able to cooperate with China. It's just that the present administration, government in the US is not willing to do that, has chosen not to, and has chosen on its way to decline to be in confrontational Cold War atmosphere and try to fight and compete with and win over China. So I would say there's nothing would in principle prevent the attitude even thinking of cooperating. Then of course, I don't know what cataclysmic thing would then be, except, you know, the West falling apart, if you will. That would be pretty cataclysmic, I guess. But, you know, if it's a very, Joe Biden was in China, and he seems to have spent hours and hours with Xi Jinping. And he gives a lecture, and it's on YouTube. Everyone can see it. he gives a lecture 10 years ago to school children where Xi Jinping is sitting right behind him at the blackboard while he speaks to the school kids. And his 10, 11-minute speech is all about how fantastic it is to cooperate with China. And he wants, as he was vice president of Obama at that time, he speaks about how important it is that China gets stronger, how important it is that Chinese students can get to the US and US students can go to China to learn. He talks about trade and investment, and he says repeatedly, 5, 6 times during these 10 minutes, how important it is that China becomes stronger economically and otherwise. 10 years later, you have him as president, and he says nothing but confrontation, negative stuff. He calls Xi Jinping a thug, and he says, no way we will cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative. And he has invented, or his administration, of course, he hadn't done it himself. The whole thing is about starting a Cold War now against China. I don't know what has happened in between. I simply don't know what's going on in of course, not one person's mind, but the fact is that his personal views at the time as vice president of the United States of America was totally in favor of a strong China with which the US could cooperate, not compete. Of course, he has people around him in the military-industrial complex. He has advisors. He has Mr. Blinken as Secretary of State. He has other, so to speak, obstacles, but where he himself is, I don't know today, because what he says is 180 degrees the opposite of what he said 10 years ago as the second most important person in the United States.
Yeah, I think we can only hope that it can again turn the opposite direction.
Yes, but you have to have a completely new administration with a completely different view, because what we are publishing in a short while, in a couple of weeks from now, is a 100 pages plus report about that orchestrated, well-planned campaign against China that has been on for some time, but which is very comprehensive and very deliberate. And my view is that unless the allies in Europe can talk America away from this, for instance, Germany and France, who have interest in cooperating with China, they are the only ones the US may listen to, if anybody. They don't listen to Russia or to China. They might listen, if to anybody, they might listen to their friends in Europe, NATO and EU friends. And unless they say, or EU says, as with one voice, we do not want the Cold War nonsense on, then I think we're going into a Cold War, and most people don't know about it. At this moment, if you, the man or the woman in the street, they might not know about the fact that there is a new Cold War being planned deliberately, systematically by the United States. And you see, when Biden was in Europe a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago, he did not manage what he wanted to do, namely to gang up NATO and EU countries against China. Particularly, if I understood it correctly, China said no. Germany said no to a Cold War with China. But cataclysmic, I don't know. I hope we will not end up having a big war in the US, or the US goes down as an empire by firing tactical nuclear weapons. But my point is that since I have never in my life been anti-American, I think it's very sad that the US is going to destroy itself, because it is not going to be able to fight a Cold War with China, technologically, economically, education-wise, research-wise. Secondly, we cannot have the two strongest economies in the world and the most important countries in the world fighting each other, because we need them to cooperate to help the world solve all the problems we have with the environment, with poverty, you know, all these development goals and sustainability, and survive as humanity. Humanity ought to rise and say, we do not want, we do not accept, stop this Cold War, Washington. It's not only what we can say, you and I and others, ordinary citizens who think this is too bad. The world should be aware that we cannot solve humanity's problems that must be solved very quickly, unless it's going to be too late, if the two parties cannot cooperate about these things.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Just 5 seconds, I'll be back.
Meanwhile, it is great to see questions in the chat. Just be a little bit patient. I will come back to all of you and invite you to ask your questions. Yeah. And for now, we have Piotr from Denmark. DNS.
Yeah,
Denmark.
hello,
Hi.
here. Thank you for all the questions now and answers. I have some comment more from maybe historical point of view, trying to say that multipolar world has used to be something normal, and the unipolar world has been kind of recent, very bizarre experiment. You see, would start 2015 years ago. A Chinese emperor receives a rhino as a gift. And then you could say, well, yeah, gift for emperor rhino, it's cool. But then the question is, where are the rhinos? They are Japan? No. Indochina? No. India? No. The rhinoceros, they come from East Africa. And if you imagine over 2,000 years ago, to take a rhinoceros from East Africa and get it all the way to China, it's many, many months endeavor. It's a not normal thing to do. And this is just to show that there had been over millennia, starting maybe 6,000 years ago, a trade network throughout the coast, starting from the south of Mozambique at some point to Korea, encompassing all Indian Ocean, Indochina, Indian states, and the rulers were changing, but this network was existing there over the centuries and millennia. And it's not that it was devoid violence, but was relatively very, very peaceful project. And nobody from one side of the trade route would jump to other side and say, oh, now we from India want to control Africa, so we have all the profits from the trade route. That was regarded as bizarre, as something impossible, not worth considering. And you see, this trade network has existed until some 500 years ago, where the Europeans appeared on the Indian Ocean. They were first the Portuguese. And you see, when they came to this trade network, they had nothing to offer. Like the products which came from Europe were nothing that could be interesting for the people. The only thing they had better was weapons. So what happens is that the Portuguese and later others basically burned down one city after another. So they were following the coast, going to the city, plundering and burning down, and they destroyed this trade network. And they had nothing to replace it with. And as they were then in charge of, they ruled the ocean, whether they were Portuguese or British or Dutch, they had a certain inability to trade with other cultures. And that's how colonialism is born, where the idea is that the Christians would control both sides of the trade route, and that's the only way to trade. And it is something very recent, very bizarre, very unusual. But thinking like the Belt and Road Initiative, it is something that has existed over millennia, that we just cooperate and nobody enforce anything on other cultures. This is like a default. So shouldn't we think, oh, there's something, it is exceptional, it's great, greatest, biggest project in the human history, as you mentioned, but it's not something unusual. The short European bizarre domination, that was something unusual and strange. Yeah, that was my point.
Well, thank you for bringing in that historic perspective, a globally historic perspective, which I think, I'm not a historian, you obviously are, I think is very helpful. In that sense, you're right. The New Belt and Road is very much, and it's also called the New Silk Roads. It does include now harbors also, in a way. Of course, the old Silk Road did not. But the idea of trading has always been part of civilization, trading one way or the other. And this project, you could say, is traditional in that sense. Let's come together, trade and exchange goods and services and fast communications and cultural centers and education of students in different countries, etc. So we get to know each other, and we also get things transported faster than in any time in history before. But it is extraordinary in the sense that it's only set up in 2013 when the Chinese president spoke about this long-range project in Astana, Kazakhstan's capital, and put $1,000 billion behind it. And in that short while, in different ways, it now is involving something like 140 countries, more or less big projects. And in that sense, I think it's unique. But you may say, and as I hear you emphasizing, the idea itself is nothing new. What I hope it will lead to, and you said the world in the beginning is multipolar world. We have lived for a long time with the unipolar world, a monopolar world, namely since 45 with the United States being the empire that tried to have global full spectrum dominance in economics, politics, intelligence, security, and God knows what. That time is over. And that's why I see something positive in the terrible crisis we're in, that we might be able, in the best of cases, to create a multipolar world where we have centers around the world who cooperate as nodes with its own groups here and there, but we come together as one world, nobody trying to impose one set of values on everybody else, which is a perverse idea, has always been a perverse idea, but of course is part of the Western thinking to universalize our own values and ways of thinking, political systems, interpretations of human rights, ways of trading, ways of telling who should do what, etc. So in that sense, I'm very hopeful. I used to say, if we survive the next 10 years, the world could be a great place. And that's exactly because what you say, multipolar world has always been in a way, but not the last, since 45. And also, I think I should add that I do not believe, and I think I've hinted that in the videos, I do not believe that China will become an empire. Nothing, at least, and nobody is so stupid anymore with our complex world to believe that our system is the only right one and we're going to impose it on everybody else. That is a conflict strategy, that's a violence and warfare strategy, and that is not what China wants. China wants a strong self-defense. Nobody's going to, harass China, but it's not going to set up bases all over the world. It's not going to say that we should all speak Chinese. It's not going to make us all Buddhists or Confucianists, and it's not going to try to sell its basically one party system to everybody in the world. And I find that great.
Hello.
Yep.
Sanjay from India. If you look to these BRI initiatives, there is a different type of analysis is going on this way, and there is when talking about the sustainability of this BRI project, there is one question is highly analysis by all the experts, like there is a possibility of debt risks for the poor country or for the developing country. That is one, and the second is there is also some examples like the Gwadar port in Pakistan, or maybe the Laos, the electricity things are handed over by these BRI projects, and maybe the Hambut port in Sri Lanka. These are some of the highlights things, but the bad impacts of this, maybe we can say that about this BRI initiative. So is there any threat to the country or some poor country, or is there is any it is threat to their sovereignty if the China maybe they establish any base camp or the military services in this way, if there is any hidden agenda maybe of the China, so it will be more threat to the justice and peace of the world as well, or the humanity, the sake of humanity. So how we can just take as this
Well,
point?
if I understand your question correctly, there is always a risk that somebody who is big, growing bigger and becoming stronger will also lose his common sense and begin to be exploitative, authoritarian, dictate the rules, etc. Then I think the world will pull out. And there's no reason to start out saying that that is China's fate in the next 20 or 30 years. Whatever China would do in that period, I think will be better than what the Western world has done, because the Western world led by the United States has not even made a good society for themselves. And that's where I have a problem with many people who criticize China. They say, oh, look at that, they use coal, and look at that, they are still doing this and that, and look at, you must remember that China was a very, very poor country just 40, 50 years ago. You must remember that lots of mistakes will be made, but that they have had the will to devise a new vision, another way of creating a society for 1,400 million people that we have never tried in the Western world. They have an eclectic social model. We can combine capitalism with socialism and a communist party. We can combine bottom line democracy with a one-party system. By the way, the party is 95 million people, so it's not just a one-man system, if that's what people think in the West, etc. But the point would be, you and I do not know where we are going with China the next 20 years, but I would say two things. Give them a chance. Give them a chance because they're doing something new that is interesting in itself. And they have proven already the last 40 years that something very interesting is happening, and they have succeeded with a lot of the things they set up. Secondly, if you are afraid of China, whatever it might do in the future, becoming too dominant, too strong or whatever, the only way to avoid that, the only way to influence China is to work with China. To confront China and just say, we'll not be part of this lousy system, their dictatorships and their this and that will not work and will not influence them. That's also why I have called my latest article, Let's Give the United States a Helping Hand. You will never get people to listen if you just scold them, if you just start a Cold War on them, if you just speak negatively about them, then they won't listen to you. So if you have the slightest, sense that in the long run, China could become very arrogant, so to speak. I personally don't believe it for philosophical reasons, but that's not the part here. If you are afraid of that, the best strategy will be to cooperate. Test it. See where they're going, see how they think.
Then what do you think about this Gwadar port in Pakistan and about the Sri Lanka port, what they just about their hand over the lease and for 90 years, and how we can take it at this point?
I have to be very honest with you. This Belt and Road Initiative consists of thousands of projects, and I do not have the knowledge about the particular projects you're talking about to give you a reasonably reliable and intelligent answer. I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar enough with the situation in Pakistan and Chinese-Pakistani cooperation to give you an answer to your question. I can't do that. I used to say, as a doctor should never speak about a patient he has never or she has never seen, and I don't speak about countries I've not visited. I'm sorry, but I've not been visiting your country or looked into that particular project. C'est la vie.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Sounds like a next project building up for you there, no?
Yes, I may do that.
Is it possible to make some short remarks, if I may ask?
Yeah, sure, Stefan.
I should introduce myself. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Stephen Brouwer. I'm a colleague actually of Tora Vesby, who is a colleague of Jan Öberg. But Jan and I have not had the pleasure of speaking before. But I wanted to make just a couple of brief remarks. I don't want to take too much time if it's not appropriate in this context. One point is I would invite people to a webinar that is being held on the 14th of July on the Belt and Road and Xinjiang province, which is being held by the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. Tora Vesby will also make some remarks there. And I think that Jan Öberg has also written a report together with Tora Vesby on a critical analysis of the so-called accusations of genocide in Xinjiang, which originated directly out of an intelligence organization in the United States, together with other collaborators. In any case, I would be welcoming people to join the webinar on the 14th. I would like to make some brief comments on the problem of the United States. I am a Swedish citizen, but I am originally an American. And what the United States is doing at the present time is a strategic catastrophe, as I think Jan Öberg has indicated. But I would like to make reference to something that is not necessarily clear in a historical context. The founder of geopolitics was a Brit by the name of Halford Mackinder, who wrote at the turn of the 1900s, when the British Empire was at its still in its relative prime, about how the British Empire, which was based on maritime dominance of the world, would address that problem. And the essence, without going into details, of the proposal by Halford Mackinder, who anybody can Google and check out for themselves, I encourage you to do that, was that he who controls the heartland controls the world. Now, the heartland meaning Asia. And that has been a power structure that continues to dominate world political power decisions. And one of the big problems we have in the West is what I would call institutional corruption, which is predominantly based on this policy of Mackinder, which still, whether Mackinder is gone or not, dominates the intelligence organizations, the Five Eyes and other things, which are continuing to promulgate the false and inaccurate idea that China is and Russia are the enemy of the West and our security problems. In reference to one brief thing, I have a colleague who is working with me. His name is Hussein Askari, who's written a report precisely on this question of the so-called debt trap, which we can make available because it documents that there is no substance to the accusations about what happened in Sri Lanka, other than it is another avenue that is being used to try and blacklist China. The last thing I would just like to say, and I'll stop. I don't want to go too far. I can see that the young lady is wondering if I'm going to talk too long, and I hope I'm not, but is that there are two conceptions of the human being. One is a notion that human beings have this is a Hobbesian philosophy of the British, Hobbesian Locke, that human beings are basically very egotistical and greedy, and they will consistently do what is in their own interests. There's another, much less well-defined or spread in the present circumstances, an idea that human beings are created in the image of our creator, that they have a creative mind, which is based on the notion of truth and beauty. Now that idea, of course, it has to be developed in a broader context, but that idea of what defines a positive, optimistic idea of the human mind, which is essential for the basis of cooperation. And that is, in practical terms, what the BRI is proposing for, not alone for the China, but 140 countries have gone into and joined the BRI or collaborating with it. So it's a conception of, do you believe that the human being has a positive identity in history, or are you convinced, like Hobbes would have you believe, that we are all just egotistical beasts who are after our own self-interest? And if you have that view, which the intelligence community operates from, you can never have the type of cooperation that we need. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated it. Basically everything you said. And definitely we cannot survive in this little world unless we build on the idea that people have the capacity for cooperation and for goodwill and for trust. You know, only building a world on the opposite is a hopeless project. And I would just add one thing very quickly. We call it in our forthcoming report, we call it the accusation industry, because it's one new thing after the other that comes up, which is deliberately negative about China. At the moment, for instance, you may have seen that it is the impending invasion of Taiwan. For a period and on war talks in the future, it will be Xinjiang, it will be Tibet when Dalai Lama dies, etc. And it's been this idea that there's a debt trap everywhere, and China is just out to do bad things with poor countries, and it has been forced labor for a period, etc. There is one accusation after the other coming up, and I think we should, our participant here should be aware that there is this project, now a law in the United States, which is called the China Competition Law, and it says that the United States shall invest $1.5 billion in the next 5 years in training journalists to exclusively write negative articles about the Belt and Road Initiative. Dear friends who they're certainly not free anymore, and the United States can be considered a country with state-controlled media after this. It's very, very sad. As I said, and I want to repeat, I've never been anti-American. It pains my heart to see the way the US is going now, which I agree with you is a strategic catastrophe for itself.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your contribution. I think it was so nice that you joined our call and our conversation. And actually, it would be great if you share the link to the seminar you have mentioned in the chat, so people who are interested and all of us would be able to find some more details on it.
To register, exactly. I should try and do that. I'm not so... is Tora Vespu on the call? I mean, on the link anymore? I saw him earlier.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, Jan. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I was just on my way to to suggest that I could help you out with this. I will do
Yeah.
that. So it will come.
Yeah, Tora will also speak at the webinar. So if he could share that link, then we can go right ahead, and everybody who is interested can register. I encourage you to do so.
I'm putting out the link in a minute.
Thank you. So with a little cooperation, we can share this information. And I think it would be a great continuation for this topic, because obviously today our conversation will last for another maybe 20 minutes. That's how long we allocated for this. And we can continue it in that seminar. So thank you very much for sharing it with us. Next question would go to Imasiko. Imasiko Sitali, would you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hello, I hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. I have this question to you. I'm Imasiko Sitali. I'm currently here in Denmark, in Lindesborg, as a teacher, but I come from Zambia, in Africa, southern part of Africa. Basically, my question is, why is China viewed as a nuisance by the West in terms of its development agenda in many African countries?
Well, with particular reference to Africa, I can say I have only seen the Chinese operate in Somalia in the late 70s, and I've seen them operate in Burundi, places that I've been working in. I don't know anything about Zambia or Africa in general, or Chinese politics as such in this area. But to your question, I would say there are several factors. There is a very old, and by very old, I mean something like 150 years old, Western, particularly US, racist attitude to what is called the yellow peril. And the first law, racist law, if you will, in the United States is from the 1860s, in which it was hitting those Japanese and Chinese who built railroads. They were simply, treated like second, third class people. And it's well documented in books, both in terms of posters, texts, discrimination, human rights violations, etc. And there has always been, even in the 60s, the yellow peril was mentioned in the Soviet, were very strongly at odds with each other about the right type of socialism. And at that time, into the 70s, until that happened, namely that Henry Kissinger made a secret visit to China, and then President Nixon came there and met Zhou Enlai. And they made a declaration about how to cooperate and how the United States would not interfere in Chinese internal affairs, including Taiwan, which was clearly indicated by the US in writing that Taiwan belongs to China, and we will not interfere with that issue. So you move up till today, and I would say there you come to the more contemporary reason. The contemporary reason is that the United States has wasted the last 20, 30 years on warfare, on global dominance, on special troops in all kinds of countries, and on fighting terrorism. That has now gone on for 20 years. And the net result is that we have today 40 times more terrorism in the world, 40 times more people dying from terrorist attacks here and there around the world than we had in the year 2000, according to State Department. So in those years, China has just been pulling its forces together, educated people, devised a long-term strategy, and the US has kind of not followed what was going on in China. And the opening at that time in the 70s was built on the idea that if we open up to China, let China trade, exchange goods and all that, China will become more like a Western country. it will be, it was a way of hoping that it would be like us. Again, this futile idea, foolish idea by the West. Now, China has now manifested very clearly, we are never, ever going to be like the West. We are never, ever going to move in your direction. And the way you've done your economy, politics, democracy, and all. We respect it that you do it, but don't come here and tell us that we should do it. They have a different idea of what the good society is. And the third reason to answer your question is the United States is on all important indicators except the military, it's declining. Its relative power in the world compared with the 60s and 70s is way lower. And then you have somebody coming up while we are going down. That creates envy. That creates a sentiment. I would resemble it with an old patriarch who is lying old and ill in bed, and he tries to tell his children how to behave, and they say, well, grandpa, you have had your time, we're doing things differently today. And he doesn't understand the world, and he gets more and more bitter and sour, and he tries to be violent if he can. So the long story short is this kind of grumpy old patriarch is seeing somebody rising with an enormous speed, well-devised vision. The Chinese knows basically where they want to be the next 5 years, but also the next 30, 40 years. If you ask a Western leader today, where do you want your country to be? Where do you want Sweden to be? Where do you want France to be? Where do you want the US to be? You will get blah, blah, blah. They hardly have an idea about the next 4 years. They might have an idea about the next week. And that's a tremendous weakness, not to know where you really want to go. And that's also why we have no real reforms and changes in the West anymore. You may have noticed that whenever we have a problem in the West, somebody comes out and say, oh, we have devised a lot of money for this. We have put off a package of $100 billion, so we're solving the problem. No, you're not. You need structural change. You need a change in the way you think. You need reforms. It's not enough to pour money into something. And that you do that money thing into a defunct structure because you don't have a vision about a better structure. So 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why I think there's a negative attitude to China. It's very sad, and it would help ourselves much better to be inspired, be curious. But you see, there's nobody who is really curious in our media in the West. The mainstream media are not the slightest curious about anything in China, but they're writing about the negative things they think they can find. It's very sad.
Thank you, Jan. So we have possibly 1 or 2 more questions. Feel free to post them in the chat still. And for now, I would invite Christina to ask hers. So please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can both hear and see you. Great joy. Great joy.
I wanted to ask if there are already any results of this initiative, because what I feel like what you spoke about was very like this overarching theme, and I would like to know some specific examples, maybe if there are any projects that have already started. Yeah.
Well, you see, I would like to say that I understand what you're saying, but it's one of the diseases of the Western civilization at the moment. It's never been over time, but today, as part of the crisis, nobody is thinking big. We need macro history. We need a big perspective on space, and we need a big perspective of time. We need to be able to see ourselves from the outside. You know, I think the whole thing about these seminars here is that we have elevated this to be about global thinking, because nobody thinks globally anymore in the West. You take your, I don't know which country you come from, but if you take your mainstream news and your primetime television, there will be 90% of the time about your own country, and then maybe about some surrounding country or some region you're a part of or something like that. There will not be anything about the bigger world. Then you go to other countries, including Chinese media, Indonesian media, Persian media, Iranian media, etc., and you'll find that they are full of stuff about us in the Western world. They have much more of an outlook on what happens in the rest of the world. I'm not saying they're not talking about themselves, but the balance is different. So my whole point is you should try to enjoy it. We're not talking about single projects here.
I mean, if anything is actually happening, because like the idea is nice, but if it's just an idea, then what is it?
You mean the Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah.
Oh my God, 140 countries are having projects.
Okay.
It's moving fast like hell. I mean, if you go to Belgrade now, there's a huge new Chinese cultural center being inaugurated in a few months. There's a whole new railway built between Belgrade and Budapest. But in Budapest, it goes very slow because it's the EU, but on the Serbian side, it's already built. All this, this type of stuff is not a matter of, is it just a nice idea? Because when the Chinese decided that this is what they wanted, this should be the big new Silk Roads, they're not sitting down doing nothing. They're not making declarations, they're doing it. That's one of the things I like about this, and you can always discuss whether it's good or bad, or what its good sides are, or its bad sides, or its gray sides, or white sides, or black sides. But it's full of dynamic energy. If you look at what the Chinese society and the Chinese people have created, done the last 30 to 40 years, you would not ask that question, because I was there in 1983. And then for a number of reasons, I wasn't back before 2018. I was overwhelmed about what the Chinese how they have developed. It's hardworking people, it's people with a vision. Give you one example. In these 30 years, they have built 32,000 kilometers of high-speed trains. Now, you may not like train, you think it should be cars or planes instead or whatever, I don't know. But 32,000 kilometers of high-speed trains that in a few years will go about 600 kilometers an hour. What have we done in Europe? Nothing. The United States has, I think, 150 kilometers of high-speed trains, and they just decided to invest all the new infrastructure on cars, bridges, high roads, etc. Denmark does the same stupid thing. They haven't listened to anything environmental the last 60 years. They're building a future for cars, not for trains. So, look into it and read Chinese newspapers. You will see how things are exploding all over the place.
Thank you, Jan. We should definitely start reading Chinese newspapers, which might be a little bit difficult, but.
No, they're all English versions.
So
all English versions, that's not a problem. I don't speak or read Chinese, but they're all the important media are in English for anybody who wants to check what is going on in China.
That's a great tip. I think that's a great tip for all of us to take out also from this conversation, isn't it? So we have one more question out there waiting from Krishan Yada. If you can hear me, will you unmute yourself and present your question?
I do not hear or see anyone.
Yeah, it does seem that. Oh, wait a second.
I think you need to. Yeah, now you've unmuted yourself. Yes, hello, Christian.
Yes. My question is great to hear that out of 700 million people in China out of the poverty. So the question is that is there any research you have done that how it is possible? What the China have is specifically done to become out of poverty? It is a very good news, we can say. And what you have talked about the media, that yes, it is true that over like 90% news we receive from the within the country and very less news outside of the country. And it is important to know about the outside of the world. And so if there is anything in your research which tells about that how the China becomes like make the 700 people out of the poverty, this is my question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Myself nor our foundation people were uplifted from the World Bank. And of course, you can dispute whether it was 690 or 710 or whatever, you know, that can be discussed. Also, how you define poverty, of course. Long story short, there are tons of documentary programs on Chinese channels of how they have done it, and also foreigners who have studied how it's done. If you go, is the national service of the Chinese media broadcasting, CGTN, then you will be able to use their search engine, and you'll find like poverty alleviation or something like that, and you will see lots of studies, and there are lots of researchers, not in our foundation. We've done other things over the years, but there are lots of people who can give you lots of facts of how technically, politically, administratively, education-wise, etc., how this was done.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much.
And I would like to add the alleviation of poverty is something I can judge because I was there in 1983 and saw how poor China was. Anybody who's gone there the last few years will find out that, you know, it's a totally converted society towards a welfare state. But also, please notice that we have not eradicated poverty in the Western world. 20% of the United States, the biggest economy in the world, the most exploitative economy in the world, the most powerful country in the world militarily, have 20% of its citizens living under the poverty line. And if you go back to the 60s, when Lyndon Baines Johnson took over after the murder of John F. Kennedy, he declared a war on poverty. Poverty should be eradicated in the United States, particularly the big cities. Where you are today is an enormous amount of people, 20% of 350 million people who are still living without their basic needs satisfied. I find it very appalling that a country that has exploited other countries very strongly, economically in other words, and accumulated wealth to itself, has not been able to redistribute that to the benefit of the people. So if there is some kind of, you know, exploitative elements in Chinese foreign policy, I would say that may be so. I'm not that much of an expert on it, but they have at least helped their poorest people to get into survival and also thrive in terms of education, basic needs satisfaction. And they've done it very much on a model of self-reliance. They did not open up before 79 under Deng Xiaoping. So the long story short is, it's our damn duty not to judge before we know. And it's our duty to be curious. And it's our duty to try to tell the West that it's self-defeating and it is globally unacceptable to have only negative views of China. I am not somebody who is, you know, advocating everything Chinese. I know too little to do that. I think there are always darker and lighter sides in any society. What I'm trying to be is curious. And that means I'll spend much of the rest of my life studying, understanding China better, because that will be needed for my children, for my grandchildren, for others. It is a country that will influence the world, and we should help it to become a good influence, build upon cooperation with it, because there is no way we can fight the Chinese with military or Cold War. We can compete with them and say who is the best in certain fields, but there's no reason to have a Cold War to keep China down. And also, it's an illusionary idea.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, and everyone else who contributed with their questions and their thoughts and comments. I think the fact that we were around 40 participants today listening and learning something new, being curious, as we exactly talked, you talked about, Jan, is the most important step that we can do, isn't it? And also in the chat, you can see links from Torre Vestby to this next seminar and to some Chinese media. Thank you very much, that we can follow. And this initiative is going to continue. So we really enjoy the seminars with you, Jan, and we—
Thank you so much, so do I.
Yes, and the next one is going to happen next month on the 12th of August. So keep your calendars booked on that date, 4 o'clock as usual. And the topic is going to be the Balkans and the purpose of NATO. Yeah. So if you have a curiosity, which you should have, you've got to join this course, isn't it?
Very well spoken.
And of course, we ask you to share, to invite more people, invite your friends, invite your families, invite your classmates or workmates, because to build peace, we need to be more in it. A little bit more than 40 people. 40 can be sufficient, not to put it down, but a little bit more would be great, isn't it? So please share and invite, and in a chat you can see a link from Eustace to the website where you can find previous lectures and the future lectures, and you can register and receive a reminder. So this is pretty much all the information I wanted to share with you.
I could add, if I may, that since everybody has registered with an email address, perhaps your college could make a total list of people who have participated that way, and then we could circulate materials, also future seminars, videos, share others, as Torre Vestby did just today, maybe a list of media, whatever, good books or something like that, so that we keep people engaged. And from that, you know, first drop of the stone in the water, 40 small stones in the water, the waves will ripple from there. I think that would be perhaps what you lazy people over there in that college could do for the rest of the world. I heard you not saying anything there, dear.
It's a very good idea. I like it personally. I think that's the way to go.
Thank you.
You have to be involved and get, you know, updated all the time. And yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah. I'm attending it for the first time, but I've found it very beneficial because I've been following a bit about China's foreign policy for some time now. And, you know, this discussion has actually, you know, opened my mind up, and I'm looking forward for more of these kind of seminars. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the
feedback. It's a very exciting seminar, I think I can say, and it actually provokes one to think in different multi-directional ways, and optional alternatives are created actually when you come into such a seminar. Actually, it actually enlightens also. It paves paths for all of us to make something new, think out of the box. And I think that's a wonderful part of such seminars. I think it should continue, definitely.
Not only think out of the box, but smash the box.
Yes.
Don't accept boxes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It warms my heart to hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a very good initiative by school and from presenter. And we really learn a lot, and we have earlier some doubts, and it's very much clear now. Yes. And we hope for more, and your idea of sharing the materials is a very good idea. We will go with that. Yeah.
Great.
And the way of sharing materials, I'll pitch in. Don't forget that Jan is part of Transnational Foundation for Peace and Research of Peace. And in chat, you can see a link where you can subscribe to their newsletter, which has great political content. And a lot of what we talked about and Jan mentioned today, you can receive from there. So subscribe, support because peace research needs our support, also financial. Don't forget that.
Thank you.
Direct door.
I think I'll hire you as my PR agent.
Thank you, Jan. Well, this is the end of this conversation. Feel free to say your goodbyes and thank yous, and we will wrap up in a few minutes.
Well, I would like to say thank you so much to everyone and for you organizing it, and see you soon again, and see you in between, because it's what we do in between the seminars that carries change. It's not that we have a nice discussion for 1 hour here and there, and then we do nothing in between. It is exactly that. When we go from here, we tell other people, we share stuff, and we begin to learn, such as we said here, read some Chinese newspapers in English if you cannot read Chinese, and make yourself more knowledgeable about things that the Western world does not tell you about anymore. That would be my dream situation of a seminar. It's what happens between the seminars that is most important. So since I sit in France today, I would say au revoir.
Au revoir.
Do I have to translate it?
Bonne chance.
Au revoir.
Merci, mademoiselle. Okay.
Yes, thank you for a very good seminar, and we learn a lot. And this is good for we share for our students for this all the information and this what you say that we share the newsletter and the videos. So that very good for the DNS student and more our like adolescent girls and this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you.
Thank you and have a good evening, everyone. Enjoy it wherever you are. And we are closing this meeting now. All the best.
All the best.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.